The grand ballroom shimmered, a dizzying kaleidoscope of flashing lights and overly loud music. I clutched Darius's gifts, a vintage watch and a first edition of his favorite novel, feeling a nervous flutter in my stomach. Before I could even take a step inside, Serin, Darius's wife, materialized in front of me, a tight smile plastered on her face. "This is a family-only event," she announced, her voice brittle. "And you aren't family." The music seemed to swell, amplifying the sting of her words as a few nearby guests turned to stare. "But it's Darius's birthday," I stammered, my cheeks burning with shame. "I brought him these." I gestured weakly towards the beautifully wrapped presents. Serin's smile didn't falter, but her eyes turned to ice. "He doesn't want to see you," she said, her voice low enough for only me to hear. "And neither do I. Please leave." For a moment, I was speechless. My own son's birthday party, a lavish affair I had contributed to financially, and I was being turned away at the door by his wife. "Serin, this is ridiculous," I managed, trying to keep my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "I'm his mother." "Not anymore," she retorted, taking a step closer. "You're just an unwelcome guest. Now leave before I make a scene." The humiliation was a physical blow, a crushing weight on my chest. My mind raced, trying to grasp the reality of the situation. This wasn't some childish squabble. This was a deliberate, public rejection. I looked past Serin, hoping to catch Darius's eye, hoping he would intervene. But he was surrounded by a throng of laughing well-wishers, seemingly oblivious to the drama unfolding at the entrance. My heart sank. "Fine," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. I turned and walked away, the click of my heels on the marble floor echoing the hollowness in my heart. The gifts felt heavy in my hands, a painful reminder of the celebration I was being excluded from. As I reached the parking garage, the cool night air offered little solace. I placed the presents on the passenger seat, the leather cool against my trembling hands. The image of Serin's triumphant smirk burned in my mind. I started the car, the engine rumbling to life, a stark contrast to the suffocating silence that had descended upon me. As I drove away, the city lights blurred, mirroring the confusion and hurt swirling within me. I didn't cry. The shock was too profound, the humiliation too raw. Instead, a quiet resolve began to harden within me. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning. Serin had made a grave miscalculation. She had underestimated my strength, my resilience, and my unwavering love for my son. And perhaps, most importantly, she had underestimated my ability to protect what was rightfully his. The following days were a blur of restless nights and quiet contemplation. I replayed the scene at the party over and over in my mind, each repetition fueling a growing sense of unease. It wasn't just the humiliation. It was the realization of Serin's influence over Darius. He had always been a kind, generous man, but since his marriage to Serin, he'd become increasingly distant, his decisions increasingly questionable. The extravagant parties, the impulsive purchases, the whispers of mounting debt, it was all so unlike him. I feared Serin was bleeding him dry, and he was too blinded by affection, or perhaps fear, to see it. I spent hours staring out the window, watching the leaves change color, each falling leaf a symbol of the decay I felt creeping into my family. The upcoming Thanksgiving holiday, usually a time of joy and togetherness, now loomed like a dark cloud. The thought of facing Serin again, of pretending everything was normal, filled me with dread. But something else was brewing within me, a quiet determination that refused to be silenced. I needed to act not for revenge, but for protection. I needed to safeguard my family's legacy, the future I had worked so hard to build, from Serin's insatiable greed. One crisp autumn afternoon, I drove to my lawyer's office, the familiar route offering little comfort. The meeting was long and filled with legal jargon, but the purpose was clear. I needed to amend the family trust. I needed to ensure that Darius's inheritance, the money meant to secure his future and the future of his children, wouldn't be squandered on Serin's frivolous whims. I needed to create a safety net, a contingency plan for a future I desperately hoped wouldn't come to pass. The details were complex, involving stipulations and conditions, but the core principle was simple. Darius would receive his inheritance only if he demonstrated financial responsibility. If he continued down this path of reckless spending, influenced by Serin's extravagant lifestyle, the assets would be held in trust for his daughter, Talia, ensuring her future remained secure. Leaving the lawyer's office, a weight lifted from my shoulders. It wasn't the ideal solution, but it was a necessary one. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was seeking preservation. I was protecting my son, even from himself, and in doing so, I was safeguarding the future of my family. A flicker of hope ignited within me, a small spark in the darkness. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was ready to face it, armed with a newfound strength and a quiet determination to protect what I held dear. The thought of Thanksgiving still loomed, but the dread was now mingled with a sense of anticipation. Serin may have won this battle, but the war was far from over. The car's interior felt cold. The leather seats slick beneath my trembling hands. Darius hadn't said a word since we left the restaurant, his silence a heavier burden than Serin's shrill accusations. "You're embarrassing yourself, Mom," Serin had hissed, her perfectly manicured hand gripping Julian's arm. "Just go." Now, as city lights blurred past, each street lamp a stark reminder of the distance growing between my son and me. He stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched, the same way he used to look when he was a little boy trying to suppress tears. "Are you all right?" I finally asked, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't answer. He didn't even turn his head. Just that rigid silence. I looked out the window again, trying to focus on the passing scenery, anything to distract myself from the hollow ache in my chest. It wasn't the humiliation that stung the most. I had weathered far worse storms in my life. It was the way Darius had just stood there, mute and passive, as Serin dismissed me, banished me from his own birthday celebration. He used to call me every Sunday. We'd talk for hours about everything and nothing. He'd tell me about his work, about his dreams for the future. He'd confide in me about his worries, his anxieties. Now, those calls were sporadic, clipped. Serin was always there, in the background, a subtle but constant presence. "Darius, honey, isn't it time for that meeting?" She'd chime in, her voice saccharine sweet. Or, "Darling, shouldn't you be finishing that proposal?" Little by little, She'd edged her way into every corner of his life, pushing me further and further to the periphery. And Darius, my sweet, trusting Darius, had let her. He'd allowed her to build a wall between us, brick by brick, until I was left standing on the outside, looking in. I remembered a Thanksgiving, years ago, before Serin, before the coldness settled in. Darius had brought his then-girlfriend, a lovely girl named Anya, home for the holiday. The house was filled with laughter, with warmth. Darius had his arm around Anya, his eyes sparkling with happiness. He'd pulled me aside, a mischievous grin on his face. "Mom," he'd whispered, "I think she's the one." I'd hugged him tight, my heart overflowing with joy for him. That Thanksgiving, we'd stayed up late, talking, sharing stories, making plans for the future. A future that, I realized with a pang of sadness, now looked drastically different than the one we'd envisioned. There had been other Thanksgivings since then, of course, but the warmth had slowly seeped out of them, replaced by a strained politeness, a forced cheerfulness that felt hollow and artificial. Serin would dominate the conversation, talking endlessly about her latest shopping spree, her upcoming spa treatments, the extravagant vacation she and Darius were planning. Darius would sit beside her, nodding occasionally, a faint smile plastered on his face. I'd try to join in, to share a memory, a story, but my words would hang in the air, unanswered, unwanted. The car pulled up to my building. Darius finally stirred, reaching for the door handle. "Good night, Mom," he mumbled, his voice flat and emotionless. "See you later, Darius," I said, my voice catching in my throat. "We need to talk." He hesitated, his hand still on the door handle. "About what?" "About everything," I said, my voice rising slightly. "About Serin, about your life, about us." He shook his head, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "Mom, I'm tired. Can we talk about this later?" And with that, he was gone, disappearing into the night, leaving me alone with the gnawing emptiness in my heart. I sat in the car for a moment, staring at the empty space where he'd been, the silence amplifying the loneliness. Then a slow, steady resolve began to build within me. I couldn't let Serin continue to chip away at my family, to isolate my son, to drain him of everything he'd worked so hard for. I had to protect him, even if it meant taking matters into my own hands. I reached for my phone, my fingers dialing a familiar number. "Hello, Charles," I said when the call connected, my voice firm and clear. "I need to see you first thing in the morning. It's about the trust, the beach cottage, the trust." It was time to make some changes. The key turned in the lock, a hollow click echoing the hollowness in my chest. I stepped inside, the silence of my home a stark contrast to the forced gaiety I'd just left behind. On the hall table, I placed the brightly wrapped gifts Darius's birthday presents. I hadn't even bothered to open the one he'd thrust at me, a perfunctory gesture just before Serin hissed, "You really shouldn't have come." I didn't bother turning on the lights, just moved through the dim, familiar rooms to the kitchen. A glass of water, that's what I needed. The cool liquid did little to quench the burning humiliation that still simmered in my throat. It had been his 40th birthday, a milestone I'd imagined we'd celebrate as a family. Instead, I'd been treated like an unwelcome guest in my own son's life. The gift sat there, accusingly cheerful in the gloom. I thought about opening them, about pretending for a moment that things were different, that my relationship with Darius wasn't fractured beyond repair. But the charade felt too heavy, the effort too great. What's the point? I murmured to the empty room, my voice caught, a tremor of unshed tears threatening to break through the carefully constructed wall of composure I'd built around myself. I sank into a chair at the kitchen table, the cold wood a sharp reminder of the chill that had settled over my life. How had things come to this? I'd always prided myself on my close relationship with Darius. He was my only child, my world. We had weathered storms together, faced hardships, celebrated triumphs. We'd always been a team. We'll always have each other, I used to tell him, squeezing his hand whenever life felt overwhelming. Now, that sentiment seemed like a cruel joke. Serin had systematically dismantled the bond we shared, brick by unforgiving brick. I picked up my phone, the screen illuminating my face with a ghostly glow. Darius hadn't called, not a single text. A part of me, a small, desperate part, still clung to the hope that he'd realize how badly Serin had behaved, that he'd apologize, that he'd tell me he still needed me in his life. But the silence was deafening. It stretched on, minute after agonizing minute, confirming what I already knew in my heart. He wasn't going to call. He had chosen her. He'd chosen her opulent lifestyle, her constant demands, her thinly veiled disdain for me. He'd chosen her over his own mother. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the memories of the evening. Serin's condescending smile, the way she'd steered Darius away from me whenever I tried to talk to him, the hushed whispers with her friends, the barely concealed glances in my direction. Darius deserves better than this, I whispered, my voice hoarse. The thought solidified into something harder, something colder. Resolve. He did deserve better, and so did I. I wasn't going to let her win. I wasn't going to let her steal my son and my legacy. I had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to watch it all be squandered on frivolous spending and endless parties. I thought about the beach cottage, the one I'd planned to leave to Darius, the place where we'd spent so many happy summers, building sand castles and chasing waves. The thought of Serin lounging on the deck, sipping cocktails and hosting her endless parade of shallow friends, made my stomach churn. Not a chance, I muttered, a flicker of steel entering my voice. I opened my laptop, the familiar glow a small beacon of hope in the darkness. There was a way. I'd spoken to my lawyer just last week, a precautionary measure I'd taken after overhearing Serin's casual mention of investment opportunities that sounded suspiciously like scams. We'd discussed the trust fund, the one I'd set up for Darius years ago. It's all in place, Mr. Harrison had assured me. We just need to activate the secondary clause. At the time, it had felt like a drastic step. Now it felt like the only option. My fingers flew across the keyboard, composing an email to Mr. Harrison. We need to move forward, I typed. I'll be in touch first thing tomorrow. I hesitated for a moment, then added, and please, keep this completely confidential. I hit send, a small sense of satisfaction settling over me. It wasn't revenge, not exactly. It was protection. Protection for Darius, for his future, for the legacy I'd worked so hard to build. and perhaps, just perhaps, a small measure of justice for myself. I glanced over at the unopened gifts, the bright wrapping paper mocking me with its forced cheer. Suddenly, I felt a surge of anger, a wave of resentment so powerful it threatened to consume me. I grabbed the gifts, one by one, and tossed them into the trash can. The sound of ripping paper and shattering plastic was surprisingly cathartic. I stood there for a moment, watching the discarded remnants of a birthday celebration that had never truly been. The silence in the house was no longer empty. It was filled with a new kind of resolve, a quiet strength that whispered of a future I would shape, a future where I would reclaim what was rightfully mine. Thanksgiving was just a few months away. I had a feeling this year's celebration would be very different. Very different indeed. Rain lashed against the windows, mirroring the storm inside me. I sat at the kitchen table, the unopened gifts for Darius still piled high. A sleek watch, a cashmere sweater, a first edition of his favorite author, all carefully chosen, all now mocking reminders of the birthday celebration I was so cruelly denied. The silence in the house was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. It felt like a judge, measuring out the moments of my isolation. I picked up the watch, its cool metal a stark contrast to the burning shame that still lingered. He would have loved this, I whispered, tracing the inscription on the back. To my son, with love and pride. Pride. That was a bitter joke now. The phone rang, jarring me from my reverie. It was my sister, Clara. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. "I'm fine," I lied, forcing a lightness I didn't feel. "Just a little tired." Clara wasn't fooled. "Don't try to pretend with me," she said gently. "I know how much this hurts." I finally let the tears fall, the dam of composure breaking. "It's not just the party, Clara," I choked out. "It's everything. Darius, he just stood there. He let her treat me like that. He's blinded by her. That's all," Clara said, her voice hardening. "Serin's got him wrapped around her little finger." I knew she was right, but hearing it out loud made the pain even sharper. "He used to look up to me," I murmured, staring at the unopened gifts. "He used to value my opinion, my advice. He still loves you," Clara insisted. "He's just confused. Give him time, time." The word echoed in my mind. How much time had I wasted trying to build a bridge to Serin, trying to welcome her into the family? How much time had I spent ignoring the warning signs, the casual disrespects, the constant demands for money? I thought of the beach cottage, the one my husband and I had poured our hearts and souls into, the place where we'd made so many happy memories. Darius had always loved it there, and now Serin was redecorating it, tearing out the heart of it piece by piece, turning it into some sterile, modern showpiece. She'd even had the audacity to tell me the floral wallpaper in the guest room clashed with her aesthetic. My aesthetic. The aesthetic of a lifetime of memories. "I'm not going to let her take everything from us, Clara," I said, a new steel creeping into my voice. "Not the cottage, not Darius, not my legacy." Clara was silent for a moment. "What are you thinking?" she asked cautiously. I pushed the gifts aside, a plan forming in my mind, a plan as cold and sharp as the rain outside. "I'm going to protect what's mine," I said, my voice low and steady. I'm going to protect my family's future. I spent the rest of the morning lost in thought, the seeds of my plan taking root. I paced the living room, the portraits of my ancestors staring down at me, their silent witness a source of unexpected strength. They had faced their own challenges, their own betrayals. They had persevered. And so would I wouldn't let Serin's greed and manipulation destroy what generations had built. That afternoon, I called Mr. Henderson, the family lawyer. I need to make some changes, I told him, my voice unwavering, changes to the trust. He agreed to meet me the following morning. As I hung up the phone, a flicker of something akin to hope began to stir within me. It wasn't joy, not yet. It was more like a quiet resolve, a sense of purpose that had been missing since Darius had announced his engagement to Serin. The rain continued to fall, but the storm inside me had begun to subside, replaced by cold, calculating calm. I thought of Thanksgiving, just a few months away. It was always a special time for our family, a time for gathering at the beach cottage, sharing stories, and giving thanks for the blessings in our lives. I pictured Serin there, presiding over the dinner table, basking in the glow of her supposed victory. A small, tight smile played on my lips. This year, Thanksgiving would be different. This year, Serin would learn that some things are more valuable than money, and that some bonds are stronger than she could ever imagine. This year, she would learn that a mother's love, while it can be wounded, can never be truly broken, and sometimes that love can manifest in unexpected ways. The gentle clinking of coffee cups and hushed murmurs of conversation filled the cafe as I stirred my latte, the warmth doing little to thaw the chill that had settled in my bones. I was still reeling from Serin's harsh words at Darius's birthday party, the echo of "you're not welcome here" bouncing around my head. "Another latte, Amelia?" the barista asked, her voice kind. "No, thank you, just the bill," I replied, forcing a smile. As I waited, a familiar face appeared at the entrance. "Cordell, what a surprise," I said, gesturing for him to join me. He slid into the booth across from me, a worried look in his eyes. "Amelia, I ran into Darius yesterday. He seemed troubled." He paused, taking a sip of his coffee. "I hate to bring this up, but it's been bothering me. It's about Serin." My heart sank. I already knew this conversation wouldn't be pleasant. "What about her?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "She's been well. She's been spending a lot of money," Cordell began, his voice low. "New car, designer clothes, lavish parties, you name it." I overheard her talking to Julian the other day about a trip to the Maldives. "The Maldives, Amelia?" I nodded slowly, a sickening feeling growing in my stomach. "I know she enjoys the finer things, Cordell, but Darius has a good job." My voice trailed off, doubt creeping in. "That's just it, Amelia. He doesn't have that good of a job. Not Maldives good. Anyway," Cordell leaned in, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I heard well. I heard she's been dipping into his retirement savings." My breath hitched. His retirement savings. But how my mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Darius had always been so responsible with money. Apparently, she convinced him to invest in some venture, Cordell said, making air quotes with his fingers. "Something Julian is involved in." It sounded shady to me, And now Darius is scrambling. He's taking on extra shifts, selling some of his some of your mother's old jewelry. The mention of my mother's jewelry, heirlooms I had gifted to Darius, sent a wave of anger through me. He's selling family heirlooms? I asked, my voice tight. Cordell nodded grimly. He wouldn't tell me much, just said he needed to liquidate some assets. He looked defeated. Amelia, like a shell of his former self, I stared into the swirling remnants of my latte, the foam now resembling a murky whirlpool mirroring the turmoil in my gut. Serin's callous words at the party, her extravagant spending, the Maldives, it all clicked into place with sickening clarity. She wasn't just frivolous, she was systematically draining Darius dry, chipping away at his future, at our family's future. I thought about Talia, my granddaughter, Darius, and Serin's daughter. What kind of future would she have if her parents were financially ruined? This wasn't just about Darius anymore. It was about protecting Talia, too. I need to do something, I muttered, more to myself than to Cordell. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I know you do, Amelia, and I'm here for you. His words, though well-meaning, offered little comfort. I knew what I had to do, but the thought of it felt like a heavy stone in my chest. It would mean going against Darius, possibly even alienating him further. But I couldn't stand by and watch Serin dismantle everything we had worked so hard to build. My mother's legacy, Darius's future, Talia's security, it all rested on my shoulders. I paid the bill, my hands trembling slightly, and thanked Cordell for telling me. As I walked out into the crisp autumn air, the golden leaves swirling around my feet, I knew my next step. I had to see Mr. Henderson, my lawyer. The trust fund, the one my mother had established for Darius, the one meant to secure his future, needed to be amended. I needed to ensure that Serin couldn't touch a single cent of it. And perhaps, just perhaps, there was a way to use it to leverage Darius into making some much-needed changes in his life. The beach cottage, maybe it could play a role in all of this. A sudden thought struck me. Thanksgiving was just around the corner. Maybe, just maybe, this year's Thanksgiving would be a turning point, not just for Darius, but for our entire family. Rain lashed against the windows, mirroring the turmoil inside me. Serin's words, "You're not welcome here," still echoed in my ears, a cruel refrain to Darius's silence. That night, after I was so publicly dismissed from my own son's birthday party, I didn't cry. I simply drove home, the city lights blurring through the rain-streaked windshield. It was time to protect what I had built, what my late husband and I had worked so hard for. Our legacy wasn't meant for frivolous spending and a lifestyle beyond Darius's means. I couldn't stand by and watch Serin drain him dry, leaving him with nothing. I needed to safeguard the future, especially for my granddaughter, Talia. The beach cottage trust fund it all needed reevaluating. The next morning, I called Mr. Henderson, our family lawyer for decades. "I need to see you," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "It's about the trust." He knew what that meant. We'd discussed contingencies before, whispers of what-ifs surrounding Darius and his choices. "Come in tomorrow," he replied, his tone grave. "We'll sort it out." Sitting in Mr. Henderson's office, the familiar scent of old books and leather calmed me. I want to make changes to the trust, I stated, getting straight to the point. He nodded, his expression serious. I understand. Tell me what you have in mind. I explained my concerns about Darius's financial stability and Serin's influence. He's letting her dictate his spending, I said, and it's frightening. He's not thinking clearly. So, what are you proposing? Mr. Henderson asked, pulling out a thick file. I want to add conditions. I replied, my voice firm. Darius needs to demonstrate financial responsibility before he gains full access. I'm not cutting him off completely, but I need to protect the principal. Mr. Henderson listened intently, taking notes. I went on to explain that if Darius didn't meet specific financial criteria, maintaining a stable income, demonstrating responsible budgeting, and consulting a financial advisor within a set time frame, the bulk of the trust would be held until Talia reached a certain age. It wouldn't be accessible to Darius or Serin. And the beach cottage? Mr. Henderson inquired, looking up from his notes. I hesitated for a moment. The beach cottage held so many memories, summers filled with laughter and the scent of salt air. But sentiment couldn't cloud my judgment. I'd like to add a clause there, too, I said. The same conditions apply. If Darius doesn't meet the financial requirements, the cottage will be held in trust for Talia as well. Mr. Henderson nodded slowly. This is a significant change, he said, but understandable given your concerns. We can certainly draft the necessary amendments. We spent the next few hours discussing the details, the specific criteria for Darius, and the timeline for his compliance. Mr. Henderson patiently explained the legal ramifications, ensuring I understood the implications of every clause. As I left his office, the rain had stopped, and a sliver of sun peeked through the clouds. A sense of calm had settled over me, a quiet resolve. I hadn't sought revenge in the traditional sense. I hadn't stooped to Serin's level. I had simply taken steps to protect my family's legacy, to ensure that the future wouldn't be jeopardized by impulsive spending and unchecked ambition. I knew this wouldn't be easy. Darius wouldn't understand. He might even be angry. But I had to do what was right, not just for him, but for Talia, for the future generations. That evening, I sat by the fire, the legal documents Mr. Henderson had prepared spread out on the coffee table. I reread them carefully, every word, every clause. It was done. The safeguards were in place. I picked up my phone and dialed Darius's number. It rang several times before he answered. "Mom," he said, his voice hesitant. "Darius," I replied, "we need to talk. It's about the trust and the beach cottage." His silence on the other end spoke volumes. I knew this conversation wouldn't be pleasant, but I was ready. I had made my decisions, and I wouldn't be swayed. The Thanksgiving holiday was fast approaching, and I had a feeling it was going to be interesting, to say the least. Rain lashed against the window of Mr. Orline's office, blurring the city skyline into a hazy gray. "So we're agreed then," Orline said, tapping a thick folder on his mahogany desk. "These amendments ensure the trust fund will serve its original purpose, securing Darius and Talia's future, not anyone else's." He glanced at me sympathetically. I nodded, a tight knot forming in my stomach. "Yes," I said quietly. "It's not how I envisioned things, Certainly not after Serin's outburst at Darius's birthday. But it's necessary. Oraline pushed the folder toward me. Everything's outlined here. The primary beneficiary remains Darius, of course, but with the added stipulations we discussed. This protects the principal from unwise decisions. He cleared his throat, and should certain conditions not be met, Talia becomes the sole beneficiary. I picked up the folder. Its weight surprisingly heavy. It contained not just legal documents, but the shattered pieces of my hopes for a harmonious family. Serin's shrill voice echoed in my mind, her words from that awful night. "You're not welcome here. This is our family now." I closed my eyes briefly. The image of Darius's pained expression seared into my memory. He hadn't even defended me. "I still can't believe he allows her to speak to me that way," I whispered, more to myself than to Oraline. "People can be blinded by affection," Oraline offered gently, "or perhaps fear." He leaned back in his leather chair. "These amendments, however, offer a corrective lens, so to speak. They incentivize responsible financial behavior." I ran a hand over the embossed folder. "The conditions are clear." Then crystal clear, Oraline assured me. Darius has 5 years to demonstrate financial stability. This includes maintaining a steady income, avoiding excessive debt, and making sound investments. We've included specific metrics and reporting requirements. He paused, his expression turning more serious. "If these conditions aren't met, the trust automatically transfers to Talia upon her 18th birthday. She'll have a financial advisor, of course, someone independent of outside influence." I looked out at the relentless rain. "And the beach cottage?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. That small cottage, nestled on the coast, held so many precious memories. Family vacations, lazy summer days, Talia's first tentative steps on the sand. It was meant to be Darius and Talia's haven, a place of peace and joy passed down through generations. I couldn't bear the thought of Serin squandering it, turning it into another trophy of her frivolous spending. "The cottage is included in the trust," Oraline confirmed, "subject to the same conditions. If Darius meets the requirements, it becomes his. If not, it goes to Talia along with the rest of the assets." A wave of relief washed over me, stronger than the guilt that gnawed at the edges of my conscience. This wasn't about revenge, I told myself. It was about protection, protecting Darius from himself and protecting Talia's future. Serin's insatiable desire for luxury and status threatened to consume everything in its path. I had to create a firewall, a safety net for what truly mattered. "There's one more thing," I said, a new thought forming. "Thanksgiving." I looked at Oraline, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on my lips. "I want to add a clause about Thanksgiving." Oraline raised an eyebrow. "Thanksgiving." "Yes," I said, my voice gaining strength. "Every year, for as long as I'm able, I want Thanksgiving dinner held at the beach cottage, with Darius and Talia." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "And only Darius and Talia." Oraline's lips twitched in amusement. "I can certainly draft that addendum," he said, his voice laced with a hint of intrigue. "It's unconventional, but not legally problematic. Consider it a tradition clause." "Exactly," I replied, feeling a surge of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Control. Serin had tried to erase me, to banish me from my own family. But this small act of reclamation, this insistence on tradition, was my way of saying, I'm not going anywhere. This Thanksgiving, there would be no lavish catered affair at some trendy restaurant, no parade of Serin's superficial friends. There would be just family, my family, and Serin wouldn't be a part of it. I stood up, the weight of the folder feeling significantly lighter now. The rain outside had subsided, and a sliver of sunlight peeked through the clouds. Thank you, Mr. Orline, I said, a sense of calm settling over me. You've given me back more than just peace of mind. You've given me hope. I left the office, stepping out into the crisp, rain-washed air, and new resolve hardening in my heart. Serin had underestimated me. She thought she had won, but the game, I realized, had just begun. The crisp, legal documents felt cool and smooth against my fingertips. Mr. Hayes, my attorney, leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. So we've discussed the trust in detail, he began, his voice measured and calm. And you're certain about proceeding with these amendments? I nodded, my gaze fixed on the neat script outlining the terms. Yes, I said firmly, absolutely certain. I need to protect my family's future. After Serin's appalling behavior at Darius's birthday, ejecting me from my own son's celebration, I knew I had to act. Not a single person, not even Darius, spoke up for me that night. The silence, the complicity, it stung more than the insult itself. These changes, Mr. Hayes continued, tapping a page with his pen, are significant. They fundamentally alter the way Darius will inherit. Are you prepared for the potential fallout? He paused, his eyes searching mine. Yes, I replied, my voice unwavering. I understand the implications. I thought back to the strained phone call with Darius after the party. He'd mumbled apologies, clearly uncomfortable, but ultimately defended Serin's actions. She's just stressed, he'd said, his voice tight. It's been a difficult year. I bit back the urge to remind him of how many difficult years Serin's extravagant spending had caused us. The primary change, Mr. Hayes explained, his voice returning to its professional tone, is the addition of these conditions precedent. He pointed to a highlighted section of the document. Before Darius can access the principle of the trust, including the beach cottage, he emphasized the last part, knowing how much that property meant to our family. He must demonstrate consistent financial stability for a period of 5 years. My mind flashed back to the endless stream of frivolous purchases Serin paraded on social media: designer handbags, luxury vacations, a sports car Darius clearly couldn't afford. This trust, my husband's hard work and dedication condensed into a legal document, was meant to secure their future, not fund Serin's insatiable appetite for luxury. What constitutes financial stability? I asked, my voice low. It's clearly defined here, Mr. Hayes replied, sliding the document closer. Maintaining a steady income, demonstrable budgeting practices, no significant outstanding debts beyond a reasonable mortgage. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses. Essentially, proof that he can manage his finances responsibly. And if he can't, I prompted, already knowing the answer, but needing to hear it articulated, Mr. Hayes cleared his throat. If, after 5 years, Dryas hasn't met these conditions, he said, the trust assets, including the beach cottage, will transfer to Talia, my granddaughter, the sweet, innocent child caught in the crossfire of this mess. The thought of her gave me the strength to continue. This wasn't just about punishing Dryas or Serin. It was about protecting Talia's future, ensuring that she wouldn't suffer the consequences of their recklessness. There's also the matter of the annual Thanksgiving gathering at the beach cottage, I said, remembering the decades of family traditions held within those weathered walls. That's addressed here as well, Mr. Hayes confirmed, pointing to another clause. The cottage remains available for the family Thanksgiving gathering for the next 5 years, regardless of whether Dryas meets the financial conditions. However, he paused. After that period, access reverts to whomever controls the trust, either Dryas, if he fulfills the conditions, or Talia, if he does not. I pictured Serin's smug face, hosting Thanksgiving dinners at our family cottage as if it were rightfully hers. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but a necessary one. This feels right, I finally said, a sense of calm settling over me. It wasn't the future I'd envisioned for my family, but it was the future I needed to create. One where my legacy, my husband's hard work, wouldn't be squandered away on fleeting luxuries and impulsive decisions. One where Talia would be safeguarded, no matter what. I picked up the pen, the weight of it feeling strangely comforting in my hand. This wasn't revenge, not really. It was a safeguard, a last resort to protect what I held most dear. And as I signed my name on the dotted line, I knew I was making the right decision, no matter how difficult it might be. I just prayed Dryas would understand, would rise to the occasion, for himself, for Talia, for our family. The future of Thanksgiving hung in the balance. Sunlight streamed through the bay window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I carefully placed the thick envelope back in the safe, the weight of it strangely comforting. It felt final. My lawyer, Ms. Hernandez, had called earlier that morning. Everything is signed and finalized, she'd said, her voice crisp and professional. The amended trust documents are now legally binding. Hearing those words, a wave of relief, so profound it almost brought me to my knees, washed over me. For weeks, the image of Serin's triumphant smirk, as she practically shoved me out the door of Dryas's birthday party, had played on a loop in my mind. "You're not welcome here," she'd hissed, her eyes glittering with something I couldn't quite decipher. "This is our family now." The memory still stung, a raw, open wound. But now, with these documents safely secured, the sting was beginning to fade, replaced by a quiet sense of satisfaction. The trust my husband and I had built it painstakingly over decades was finally safe. Safe from Serin's endless spending and Julian's harebrained investment schemes. Initially, it had been set up to pass directly to Dryas upon my death, but after witnessing Serin's behavior, her blatant disregard for Dryas's financial well-being, I knew I had to make a change. I poured myself a cup of tea, the warmth of the porcelain mug soothing against my palms. I gazed out at the garden, remembering Dryas as a boy chasing butterflies through the flower beds. He had always been such a kind, gentle soul, so trusting. too trusting. Perhaps he was blinded by his love for Serin, unable to see the damage she was inflicting on their finances. He refused to listen to my concerns. "Mom, you're just being old-fashioned," he told me, his voice edged with impatience. "Serin just wants what's best for us. He'd see eventually, wouldn't he? He had to." The revised trust stipulated that Darius would only receive the full inheritance, including the beach cottage, the place where we'd made so many precious family memories, if he could demonstrate financial stability within 5 years. He needed to prove he could manage his own finances, free from Serin's influence, and maintain a stable job for a consecutive 12-month period. If he couldn't meet these conditions, the assets would be transferred to Talia, my granddaughter, held in trust for her until she turned 25. Talia. Just thinking about her brought a smile to my face. She was the light of my life, so full of innocence and wonder. I wanted to ensure she had a secure future, free from the financial burdens Serin seemed determined to create. Serin had even started talking about private schools for Talia, schools that Darius could barely afford. "It's an investment in her future," she'd argued when I voiced my concerns. "Don't you want the best for your granddaughter? The best for Talia," in Serin's mind, seemed to equate to the most expensive. I closed my eyes, picturing Talia playing on the beach in front of the cottage, her laughter echoing on the wind. That cottage, it was more than just a property. It was a repository of memories, of sun-drenched days, and cozy evenings spent playing board games by the fire. It was a legacy I wanted to preserve for Talia, a place where she could create her own cherished memories. The telephone rang, jarring me from my thoughts. It was Darius. "Mom," he said, his voice strained. "Serin and IW are having some issues." My heart clenched. "What kind of issues, honey?" He hesitated. "Financial issues, mostly," he finally admitted. "Serin lost her job, and well, things have been tight." I listened quietly, letting him talk, resisting the urge to say "I told you so." He went on to explain how Serin had been using their savings to maintain their lifestyle, hiding the truth from him. "I don't know what to do, Mom," he said, his voice thick with despair. "I feel like such a fool." "Oh, Darius," I said softly, "come over for dinner tonight. We can talk." I hung up the phone, my mind racing. This was it. This was the beginning of his awakening. He was finally starting to see Serin for who she truly was. As I began to prepare for dinner, a strange sense of calm settled over me. The mended trust was in place. Talia's future was secured. And maybe, just maybe, this Thanksgiving would be different. Perhaps, this year, we could gather round the table, a true family once more, free from the shadow of Serin's manipulative grasp. The thought filled me with a sense of hope I hadn't felt in a very long time. This Thanksgiving, I would finally have something to be truly thankful for.